shockingly bad and filled with malice. That's exactly what this entire documentary is about. I'm Vanessa, licensed therapist, retired school counselor, mom coach, and host of Tea and Takeaways, a therapist's point of view. And let me tell you, Unknown Number, the high school catfish, is one big cautionary tale for anyone raising or working with tweens and teens. Now, here's how we'll break it down. I won't give you a play by play of the recap. You can find that elsewhere on other channels. But here, I will share the tea, some of my real thoughts as I watch, and the takeaways using both my therapist lens and, in this case, my 14 years experience as a school counselor and anti-bullying specialist. So parents, if you've got kids anywhere between 8 and 18, you'll want to stay with me throughout the entire video because this documentary touches on dating, teen dynamics, bullying, phones, and the ever complicated parent-child relationship. Now, quick disclaimer, while I am a therapist, I'm not your therapist, and this video only serves as educational purposes only. But I have included resources in the show notes below and throughout the video should you need to find or learn more. And one more thing, the documentary is rated MA for a reason. The text shown are real, the language is intense, and it also references sexual harm, which could spark some powerful conversations with high schoolers, but I do not recommend watching it with middle schoolers. So grab your cup, let's spill some tea, and dive into these deep takeaways. All right, let's get into it and starting with the title. The word catfish technically means to lure someone into a relationship by means of a fictional online persona. And while the kids and the families in this situation were definitely lied to because the person texting was hiding their identity, there wasn't any real luring into a romantic relationship happening here. So calling it catfish feels off. It's probably a marketing tactic more than anything because there wasn't romantic luring. But the deception was real on another level, real. And we'll come back to that because there is a term that fits much better than catfishing. Also, to really understand the dynamics, we have to look at where this took place, which was Bean City High School in Michigan. This is a town where they started the documentary by saying it has one stoplight and two bars. All of the kids from preschool to high school are in one building. I can't recall if they said the entire building was 700 kids or just the high school was, but either way, it's a very small town. And when you grow up in a small town like that, your world it has to look very different compared to a bigger place. I'm from Jersey, right outside of New York City, and my graduating class alone had about 600 kids. That's almost an entire town for them, though. So know that your upbringing and your environment shape how you see life, how you form relationships, and yes, even how you date. And that's super important to keep in mind as we go through all of the topics that we're going to cover today because context matters. So let's talk about dating. At what age you allow your kids to date is truly a family value because it's shaped by your own experiences, your religion, your culture, and sometimes even your own fears. And in this story, we see that the girl and boy began dating around 12 years old, seventh grade. Now, depending on your perspective, you might be thinking that's entirely too young. Developmentally, though, 12 is the stage where kids are starting to explore their identities and their independence, and they begin pulling away a little bit more from their parents and leaning more on friends and becoming hyper aware of how they're perceived by their peers. So, crushes and early relationships are often less about deep romance, right? And more about experimenting with what it feels like to connect with someone else outside of family. And at that age, dating often means texting all day, sitting next to each other at lunch, walking together in the hallway, maybe holding hands. Not all the time, but generally speaking, it's truly about the idea of having a relationship more than the reality of one. My husband, as he was watching it with me, actually thought that it was odd that the parents would hang out together while the kids were spending time. But here's the thing, in a small town where everyone knows each other, it makes sense to me. They weren't dates in a traditional sense, but they were just spending time together as families because maybe that was what felt the most safe to them. It also makes sense that the parents started becoming friends because their kids were hanging out so much. But here's the piece that we often overlook, and that is the breakups. Because to adults, seventh grade breakups might seem very trivial. But for our kids, it can be the end of their world. Their brains are still learning how to regulate their emotions, and their sense of self may still be fragile. So, without support, what feels like a puppy love heartbreak can truly spiral into sadness, anxiety, or even social fallout if their peers get involved in the mix. And that is where family values and guidance really matters. Because if you grew up in a culture where dating wasn't allowed till much later, you might see the age of 12 as shocking. But in other families or communities, especially in small towns where everyone knows each other, it may feel normal for kids to just pair off earlier, particularly if parents are nearby and involved. So that leads me to the takeaway. Middle school dating is less about love and more about learning because kids are practicing communication, boundaries, handling rejection, and yes, recovering from breakups. And as parents, the goal isn't to forbid or overpermit, but really it's to stay curious and set limits that align with your family values and keep communication wide open so that kids know that they don't have to go through these highs and lows all by themselves. Dating is also not a one size fits all. What feels too young for one family might feel completely normal for another, and that's okay. The important piece is that parents set clear expectations, boundaries, and values about what dating looks like in their household. Also, know the people that your kids spend time with, whether they're calling it dating, hanging out, or just friends. Kids at this age need guidance, they need supervision, they need someone to really be familiar with the other child's family so that everyone can begin to build this trust and safety. And again, a breakup at 12 isn't just silly drama. It's really practice for resilience, believe it or not. Early heartbreak teaches kids how to sit with uncomfortable emotions and how to bounce back and how to recognize what respect looks like in relationships. And when parents validate these feelings instead of just dismissing them, kids actually learn that their emotions matter and start building the foundation for healthier relationships later on. And lastly, be open to conversations and not just setting rules. Because if kids feel like dating is taboo, they'll just hide it. But when they know that they can talk to you, then they're more likely to share what's going on in their relationships, the healthy parts and the concerning parts too. Dating in middle school, obviously, is not about candlelight dinners and a long term commitment. But it's actually about what it feels like to like someone, how to communicate effectively, and what boundaries are okay. Our job as parents is to guide them through these early experiences so that they have the tools to navigate the bigger experiences later on. Now, following the theme of parent involvement, at the start of the documentary, one of the students said, "No one has anything better to do here than talk about other people, even the parents. It's just passed down from the parents. They even talk about the teenagers." And when you consider the town size and demographics, the perspective makes sense. However, doesn't make it right. In my 18 years working in New Jersey public schools, I've seen every end of the parenting spectrum. Some parents are overprotective to the point that they step in so much that it stifles their child's independence and growth. And then others are dismissive, offering little guidance or structure when kids really need it the most. And then there are the parents who are overly enmeshed, blurring the line between parents and peer by truly inserting themselves into their child's social world. And this isn't just a small town phenomenon, let me tell you, because I can tell you it happens everywhere, even in upper middle class suburbia. I've seen fathers take on other players' talents or lack thereof so personally because they've overly invested in their child's sports teams, and I've seen mothers dictate their child's texts or gossip about peers as if they too were part of the friend group. It's really different settings, but the same dynamics. And this can be really harmful to kids because when parents overstep, whether it is by controlling too much or disengaging entirely or trying to be part of the peer circle, Then our kids lose out on essential developmental experiences because they then don't learn how to make the decisions for themselves or how to navigate conflict themselves or how to build authentic relationships themselves. Instead, what happens is that they become overly dependent on their parents to solve every single problem, or they shut down and stop sharing altogether. And both of these extremes can chip away at their confidence and their ability to handle the ups and downs of growing up. So, if your child has enough friends, know that what they really need is a parent, not another friend. And there is a fine line, of course, of being approachable enough where your child feels safe in coming to you for help and stepping so far into the friends mode that the parenting role gets blurred. Kids benefit most when parents provide warmth and openness, but also when they provide guidance, boundaries, and accountability. That balance is what allows them to trust you with their struggles while still respecting you as the adult who leads the way. So, know that developmental appropriate support means that you guide, but you don't control. Kids need support in making decisions, but they also need the space to learn from their own choices. And if you find yourself micromanaging every interaction your child makes, you may want to step back and ask yourself, what lesson can they learn if I let them handle the situation themselves? It also means to care but not dismiss, because brushing off their struggles as just middle school drama can make them feel unheard. And if you catch yourself minimizing, try leading in with curiosity instead and just say things like, tell me more about what happened. You might be surprised of what you learn. Also, lead, but don't blend in because connection is important, but your role isn't to be their best friend. So if you notice yourself talking about peers' outfits or drama with your child as if you were part of the group, you may want to pause and remember that your child needs a parent, not another 13-year-old in the room. The bottom line is that kids thrive when parents hold the middle ground, not overprotective, not dismissive, not enmeshed, but the healthiest spot is to be a guide, close enough to provide support, but far away enough to let them grow. And that balance is what builds independence, resilience, and a healthier relationship down the road. So now moving from parents to friends, the social landscape of this all. In the documentary, as the community tried to figure out who was behind the anonymous text, the social landscape of adolescence came into sharp focus. Because think about it, no matter when or how long ago it is that you went to school, the cliques are always familiar. You have the athletes, the queen bees, the student government leaders, the musicians, the artsy kids, the high achievers, and the loners. And sometimes some kids can be a mix of a couple of things. These labels may change with the times, but the social hierarchies are all the same. What stood out here was how quickly people were to not only blame, but believe the blame that fell on the child who was the popular student whose dad was a police officer. By the way, I'm keeping the names out intentionally because they are minors. And in addition to her, also how quickly the blame was placed on the boy's cousin, who was positioned really as an easy target. Popularity can bring visibility, but it also brings scrutiny. And the kids who are already on the margins, no matter on what side, whether it be by personality, interest, or just circumstances, they often find themselves vulnerable to gossip, exclusion, and sometimes even bullying. Adolescence, of course, is a developmental stage where belonging matters the most. Teens are actively trying to figure out who they are and they measure themselves up against their peers constantly. We know this to be true because we've lived it too. And that's why this social map that they're navigating can feel so overwhelming. And that's why guidance at home matters all that much and more. Because parents can't erase cliques, that happens naturally, but they can prepare their kids to move through these cliques, these circumstances with confidence and with compassion, not just for themselves, but also for others. So, some takeaways here for parents and caregivers are to acknowledge the social landscape. Again, it seems trivial, but we know it to be true. And these dynamics feel very real to your child. So validate their experiences before offering perspective. Also, promote confidence without arrogance. Help your child anchor their self worth in who they are and not just where they stand socially or what they wear or what they have. Also, model and teach kindness because kids mirror what they see. If you avoid gossip and treat others respectfully, they're more likely to do the same. And encourage wide circles of friends. Guide them to explore friendships across groups because that reduces the sting of exclusion and it builds resilience. And keep perspective and focus. Social hierarchies may feel permanent, but they do shift quickly. And what lasts are truly the lessons in empathy, the lessons in confidence, and healthy boundaries. And what I'd want teens to know here is that popularity isn't protection because you know it. Being well liked doesn't make you immune to rumors or to mistakes, and it doesn't define your worth either. Also, as corny as it sounds, kindness is power. The way you treat others says more about you than the group that you're in. Friends do not define you. You can belong in more than one circle, and it's okay to step outside of the labels. And a breakup, a rumor, or an argument doesn't end your story. It's one chapter, not the entire book. And of course, middle school, high school, it's temporary. But your character, what's in your heart, that is what lasts. The choices you make now about how you treat people will follow you far longer than any clique ever will. So the bottom line here is that cliques and hierarchies will always exist, but kids don't have to be defined or diminished by them. With our guidance and their own self awareness, they can then learn how to navigate the social landscape with confidence and again with compassion, not just for themselves, but also for others. So we know that in social hierarchies, especially can imagine in a very small town, rumors move fast. But what makes them move faster? Their phones, of course. And for some parents, phones can be a very black or white issue. Either your child has one or they don't. But as this documentary highlights, and as many families know firsthand, there's so many nuances that make this a very delicate topic. Throughout the first half of the documentary, for example, I found myself saying out loud, just block the number and call it a day. And while in this case, obviously, it wouldn't have solved the deeper issues, for many kids, blocking is a powerful tool and a necessary first step. Think about it this way: if someone was berating us face to face, we wouldn't just sit there and take it, we would probably walk away. Blocking someone is almost a digital equivalent of walking away, but for kids, walking away online does feel harder than walking away in a hallway. And of course, I know that I'm simplifying something that is much, much more complicated because blocking someone on social media can lead to backlash or new accounts popping up. And even if you block one person, it doesn't guarantee that you won't see the same content shared elsewhere or that someone is going to forward you a picture or whatever it is. So the conversation has to go beyond just block them or just ignore them. But let's pull back and really start with the basics, which starts with having a phone at all. In my own practice here, I've seen kids as young as 7 and 8 years old have their own phones. And if they don't have phones sometimes, they often have iPads, which, my friends, that is giving the kids the same access to the apps and social media that a phone gives them. And I do understand the desire. We all want to stay connected with our kids. There's that safety factor, and especially for kids in separated or divorced households, or if your kid is staying with someone else outside of family after school, whatever the case is, I know that having that connection to them and them having the connection to their parents can feel especially important. But there's a big difference in giving a 7-year old a phone for communication and giving them open access to the World Wide Web. There's a reason why most platforms require users to be at least 13 years old. And providing a young kid with a phone that has social media accounts is essentially placing the entire world, the good, bad, and the harmful, in the palm of their hands. At that age, the risks just outweigh the benefits by a gazillion percent, in my opinion. That's why I often suggest alternatives like getting them a gizmo or getting them an Apple Watch because it allows them to communicate and it allows the tracking without opening the floodgates to apps that kids really are not ready for developmentally. And as kids get older, the issues, of course, get more complicated, right? By middle school and high school, the pressure to be online becomes more than an issue of just safety. It truly becomes a part of belonging. Socializing happens on group chats, on gaming devices. They are concerned with keeping up with your Snapchat streaks or TikTok trends and Instagram stories. And when kids aren't included, obviously, they feel left out. That's an awful feeling. And they feel like they're just missing a whole chunk of the worlds that their peers are in. Parents are then tasked, though, with the delicate balance of protecting their kids from harm while also acknowledging that, like it or not, that online connection is just a big part of modern adolescence. So, the takeaway here for parents are to, if possible and when possible, delay social media. A phone for communication is very different from a phone with full internet access. And for younger kids, again, consider limited devices like a gizmo or an Apple Watch. Also, teach blocking as a boundary. Explain to your kids that blocking someone is not a weakness, but it's the online version of walking away from disrespectful behavior. Also, obviously, expect social pressures as they grow. By middle school, online spaces are the social world. So prepare your kids by having honest conversations about peer comparison, about peer pressure, and about digital boundaries before they even get accounts. And when they do have the accounts, use the built in safety tools. Require approval for apps before your kid downloads them. Keep passwords shared. Use parental controls when they're available. Not as a punishment, but as protection. Have open communication about this. Discuss phone safety regularly. Make conversations about online behavior, about privacy and respect as routine as it is talking about brushing your teeth and doing your homework or doing your chores. It has to be part of our everyday conversations. And set nighttime boundaries. Phones should not be in their bedrooms. I get into this with my middle schooler all the time. He wants the alarm. We got him an alarm clock, and the phone could be in the bathroom or in our bedroom, but not in his. Collecting devices before bed protects their rest and it gives them a needed break from constant connectivity because we know it's hard to put that phone down. And back to parents, stay engaged and not just restrictive. There's a difference there. Instead of only setting rules, stay curious about what apps your kid is using. What are the apps that they're interested in? And who is it that they're connecting with? Kids are more likely to open up when they feel that you understand and not just try to control or restrict. And lastly, model healthy tech use. Kids know how much we use our phones, they see it all the time. And if we're glued to our screens constantly, they'll learn that constant online presence is normal and perhaps even required. So demonstrate that balance by modeling offline connection and having intentional use. So the bottom line here is that aren't going away, right? It's very much part of our lives. The question though isn't just when should my child get a phone, but it's really how do I equip my kid to use a phone responsibly? With delayed social media, clear safety boundaries, and ongoing conversations about digital life, kids are then better prepared to navigate the challenges of growing up online. So now let's move on to the aspect of phones in schools and the aspect of bullying. It's an interesting topic because just in New York City this week, the first week of schools, New York City schools implemented a bell to bell ban, meaning that students are not allowed to carry personal internet enabled devices. And this includes phones, smartwatches, and tablets. They're not allowed to have them during the school day. Exceptions, of course, do exist for medical reasons or for teacher approved educational use, but they are not to have them on their person. And honestly, as a mom that lives so close to New York City with a sixth grader who started off with an Apple Watch before getting into middle school, I'll tell you that makes me uneasy. The concern about losing quick access to your kids throughout the school day is real because sadly, schools just aren't the guaranteed safe place that they once were, despite their best efforts. But as an educator, I also understand the struggle of kids sneaking in DMs and texts in the middle of class. But I do ask you to consider, is all of this very different from when we wrote notes to each other and wrapped them in the shape of footballs back in the 90s? I do see both sides of the argument. But it becomes a bigger issue when it enters a world of bullying because a lot of it does happen now electronically. While watching this with my husband, he could not understand why parents would even go to the school. But the reality is, I'll share with you, it happens all the time. Every state obviously has a slight variation on what bullying means in that state. In the state of New Jersey, to say it simply as I would explain it to young kids, is that bullying is anything that you say, do, or text about a person's characteristic, whether it be real or perceived, that impacts the teacher's teaching and the student's learning. And it can happen anywhere on school grounds or at your home on a Saturday night on the phone. In this case, the parent took a long time to bring it to the school's attention. Obviously, we know why now, but it was entirely too long because it was impacting the kids at school. And while some may say that schools have nothing to do with it, and trust me, on the school end, sometimes it's such a challenge to navigate this all, especially when it is not happening on school grounds. However, we all must consider our kids' mental health. And it's not uncommon for law enforcement to be involved, especially if the kid's safety or mental health is at risk. And while the parents here tried to help their kids by wanting to come to school grounds and to run presentations and to get into the classrooms, but it just isn't appropriate for parents to go into classrooms and to talk about these things. That should be left to the schools. However, you can work alongside them. So it is something that we should take seriously because we know that bullying leads to anxiety, depression, sleep issues, academic decline, and unfortunately, even to self harm. And is the fourth leading cause of death for ages 15 to 19, with nearly 20% of teens seriously considering it in the past years. So the takeaway for parents and caregivers here is that you must understand the policy nuances, and they should be displayed on a school district's website. Phone bans do aim to reduce distraction and improve learning, and they're not punitive. They're just the environment setting tool, setting a boundary. And if your child needs device support for accessibility, of course, you can always speak to the school about accommodations. Also, speak up sensitively. If bullying or digital harassment affects your kid's school performance or their mental health, alert the school promptly. Don't say it in June when things have been happening since September, because delay may only increase the harm. Know the legal scope as well. If issues cross into behaviors outside of school that still impact learning, both education and law enforcement channels may need to be engaged. And of course, collaboration is important, but we all must know our lanes. Schools are at the helm of this, but parents can be involved with the limits that are already set by districts. And don't underestimate the risk. Bullying is not just kids being kids. 1 in 5 kids is affected, and the mental health impacts can be devastating, even as we know, fatal. So stay proactive, vigilant, and compassionate. Keep in communication with your child's school counselor or with administration with facts that impact learning. And if threats of self harm or extortion of any sort are involved, contact law enforcement immediately. You can even skip going to the school at that point. Know that if your child needs support, you can always call or text 988 in the United States, which is the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. And now we get to the part of the documentary that feels almost fake, that feels almost unbelievable, that it was the girl's own mother sending her these horrific messages, not just sexual in nature, but messages urging her to hurt herself. And towards the end, it was disgusting how the mother justified it by saying that she knew her daughter wouldn't actually do it. But the truth is, my friends, that we never know. We can never predict how a child will respond to consistent, repeated mental and emotional abuse of that level of intensity. Kids are especially vulnerable when abuse comes from a caregiver, too, because developmentally, They depend on their adults in their life for trust, for safety, and their entire sense of reality. And that's what makes this not just shocking, but dangerous and just despicable, really. I was absolutely disgusted and really quite aggravated, to put it nicely, during the last portion of the documentary because it was beyond unsettling how a parent would manipulate their own child in the way that this woman did. And what we saw was resemblance of Münchausen by proxy, which is a situation where a caregiver fabricates or induces symptoms in someone else, often it is your kids, to gain attention for themselves or to gain sympathy as the hero, per se, who cares for this sick child, whether they actually be sick or not. And in this case, it wasn't about the woman keeping her daughter physically ill, but rather mentally unstable so that she could play the role of protector or rescuer. Munchausen, also known as a factitious disorder, because it's when a person either exaggerates or deliberately makes up symptoms that they know aren't real in order to get medical attention. What's important to note here is the motivation, though, right? Because sometimes there is motivation to get money or to avoid work or to get a legal advantage of something. But factitious disorders is really about psychological gain, having attention, sympathy, or just really control. And there is a fairly new term that has been coined, Munchausen by internet, or what's now known as digital factitious disorder. And this happens when individuals use online spaces like support groups or social media to fake illnesses or to fake crises for, again, this sympathy, attention, or control. So they may post fake stories or manipulate other people or have people donate money to them because they think that they need this ongoing treatment for something that actually is not happening. And that way they keep this hold over whatever virtual space that they're in. And I'm sure with time, this is going to be more and more studied, researched, and developed. But when it comes down to it, it's really quite sad, especially when you take advantage of folks and more so when it's within your own family. The scene that stands out the most for me is when the FBI went to the mother's home, and it was almost as though she turned very childlike, the way that she didn't deny it. She was somewhat detached, very childlike, but then her daughter was very extremely detached. And I can see the mental need to do that because your whole world comes crushing down in a matter of an instant of like, wait, what is actually happening here? And it was interesting when the police officer said, call your husband. And he spoke to the husband because he said, my job is to keep you both safe. In my mind, immediately, I was like, wait a second. We also need to keep them safe, not from each other if the daughter was to retaliate against the mom or the mom against the daughter, but this husband really kept it together and did not physically retaliate against mom when he learned not just what happened, but also learned more of her work circumstance because they were in deep financial troubles. And it was just very unsettling to see. And also the fact again that we got to see it is a whole nother issue. So the biggest takeaway that I have for these families here is that I hope that they all invest in good mental health therapy with licensed clinicians who are specialized and experienced with these types of cases. Because it's beyond sad that this young girl has to forever live with this duality that her mother, who raised her, who cared for her, who coached her, was also the same person who placed her in such social, mental, and emotional distress. And I'm quite surprised that the mom received a low sentence because it seemed that not just for the harm that she caused her daughter, but also the harm that she caused the boy involved. I mean, the texts were so sexual in nature and it was towards a minor that it was just shocking to see what the outcome was. And it drives me wild, by the way, when the mom stated that she did this because of her own trauma and because she wanted to protect her daughter, which obviously proves her mental instability. But it drives me bananas because one can experience trauma, but it doesn't mean that it's going to cause you to bring intentional harm onto someone else, let alone your own child. I personally believe that there's something much deeper there than perhaps was shared on the documentary. And speaking of, by the way, these kids are still in high school. And as I was watching it, I couldn't believe that one, it was a real story, but two, that they were airing everything from personal commentary for the entire world to see. I really wrestle with the ethics of airing a story while these teens, right? They're still minors, while they're still in school at that. Because yes, public attention perhaps may bring resources. However, it also is renewed exposure to the trauma that they all went through. The documentary made it clear that the family had experienced financial distress. And while sharing their story may have offered support or even compensation for things, I still wonder, is any amount truly worth reopening such deep wounds on such a public stage? So, this documentary was disturbing on so many levels, from the social landscape of adolescence to the role of phones and social media to the unthinkable reality that a mother can inflict harm on her own child in this way. And while the details were shocking, what it really brings us back to is the importance of the parent child relationship. Our kids don't need perfection from us, they don't need all the materialistic things from us either. What they truly need from us is presence, because presence tell them, I see you, I hear you, and you matter. And kids need us to guide without controlling, to care without dismissing, and to love them enough to let them grow into who they are. So, as heavy as the story was, I hope that it's a reminder that connection, trust, and open communication at home are some of the strongest protections that we can give our kids in a world that can sometimes feel really unsafe. This is quite heavy to carry on our minds and in our hearts, but there is a lot to be learned from it as well. So, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Tea and Takeaways, a therapist POV. And if this resonated with you, be sure to check out the resources that I've linked in the show notes, including past Free to Be Mindful podcast episodes on phone safety and unmindful parenting. And as always, remember, friends, in a world where you are free to be anything, you are always free to be mindful.